who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially, just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour, yeah, and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, yeah, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health, yeah, difficulty, struggling to either adapt into, yep, civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, Prince William has issued a statement calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza. I can tell you now that statement has had a huge response. Many people, though, saying, what on earth is he doing? He should never have issued that statement and he should remain so-called politically neutral. Where are you on that? Also, as well, are we failing British farmers? Rishi Sunak today became the first Prime Minister in 15 years to address the National Farmers Union. He's trying to convince them that he has their back. Has he convinced you? And how passionate are you about buying British produce? Do we do enough to support our farmers? Also tonight, it's been suggested that courts need to start operating 24/7 to clear the case backlog. Would you agree with that? Also, as well, why keep it restricted just to courts? That's what I want to know. Also, as well, the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, he has left the Falklands today after what was the first visit by a Foreign Secretary since 1994. You tell me, was this a much needed trip or not? Yes, indeed. I want to get stuck into all of that. And, of course, speaking about Israel Gaza, Labour Party have now got a new line on that. Apparently, they're calling for what they call an immediate ceasefire. Does any of this make a jot of difference? We'll get into all of that and more. But before we do, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the breaking news tonight is that the Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has been sacked after he was found to have breached the terms of his appointment and lost the confidence of James Cleverly, the Home Secretary. David Neil said he'd received Home Office data showing that the UK Border Force had failed to check the occupants of hundreds of private jets arriving at London City Airport. But the Home Office disputed those claims with the Minister for Legal Immigration, Tom Pursglove, insisting that checks are performed on all scheduled passengers. He said it was deeply disturbing that the independent Chief Inspector leaked what he described as false information to a newspaper after reports were published by the Daily Mail. The Home Office says it is investigating the breach. We'll have more information on that, of course, as it comes to us. Meanwhile, in other news today, a body has been recovered from the River Thames, which police detectives strongly believe is that of chemical attack suspect Abdul Azidi. Earlier, police said they believed Yazidi had gone into the river at Chelsea Bridge. That was based on CCTV evidence. The body was recovered by the Metropolitan Police's Marine Unit at around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon after a report from the crew of a passing boat. His former partner, who was attacked alongside her 2 daughters, remains in hospital but is no longer under sedation. Met Police Commander John Saville says a formal identification will take time.
Because of the amount of time that the body has been in the water, it's not been obvious to do an easy visual identification or indeed get immediate fingerprints. However, with the very distinctive clothing that was being worn and the property that we found on the body, we are able to strongly believe that this is Abdul Yazidi.
Now, the sentence of a man who killed 3 people in Nottingham may have been unduly lenient, and it's now going to be reviewed by judges. Valdo Kalakane killed students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. Their families welcomed today's announcement by the Attorney-General, saying they're hopeful for an outcome that will provide some of the appropriate justice they've been calling for. As you've been hearing, Prince William says fighting in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas must end as soon as possible, adding there's a desperate need for increased humanitarian support for Gaza. The Prince of Wales has said he's deeply concerned about the terrible human cost of the conflict, with too many lives lost. It follows Lord Cameron's warning to Israel that the fighting needs to stop. And Labour has also called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in a major shift in the party's stance on the war. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the world wants the fighting to stop.
The Rafah attack cannot go ahead. We are following our Five Eyes partners, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, who a few days ago made it clear that there has to be an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We are mirroring that language and indeed the language now of the United Nations. Everyone wants the fighting to stop.
David Lammy. Now, police in Leicester are searching for a missing 2-year-old boy say they believe CCTV footage shows the moment he fell into a river. The child was with his family on Sunday at the Aylstone Meadows local nature reserve when he fell into the River Soar. It's understood the little boy's father went into the river to try to rescue him but was unable to find him. Police say they're grateful for the local community's help. Birmingham City Council says it needs a bailout worth £1.25 billion as it looks to recover from effective bankruptcy. Council leaders say a combination of austerity and underfunding has hit the city hard. They're looking at selling assets to cover some of the expenses, but residents are also facing cuts across essential services, including those in adult social care, highway maintenance and assisted transport. Dimming street lights is expected to save around £900,000 annually, while cutting refuse collections to every 2 weeks could claw back £4 million every year. And finally, the Body Shop will shut nearly half of its 198 UK shops today after falling into administration. It's understood around 270 head office jobs will also be cut in moves that administrators say will re-energise the brand. The Body Shop employs around 2,200 people across the UK. That's the news. For the very latest on news stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks very much for that, Polly. I've got to say, very sad news there for anyone employed and affected by the Body Shop. That was pretty much an institution, wasn't it, for so many years? But I've also got to say it was the bane of my life when I was at school, so it was, because, of course, my surname is Dewberry. And what was one of the key fragrances that the Body Shop sold, or probably still do sell? Dewberry. I can tell you now, I used to get an awful lot of stick during my school days for that. Anyway, keeping me company till 7 o'clock tonight. I got the PR consultant and the new father. We mentioned that, didn't we? Alex Dean, good evening to you.
Good evening.
And visiting professor at Staffordshire University, Tom Buick. Good evening to you also.
Congratulations.
We got lots of well wishes, Alex, when we shared the picture of your new arrival.
We really appreciated it. Thank you. Henry's a bit too young to realise what was going on, but in years to come, he'll be very grateful to you and to GBNews.
Oh, well, we look forward to meeting him, don't we? Maybe we'll be able to bring some sense to the political landscape of the future.
Well, I mean, he can bring sense to the landscape of the present, given the way we're going on some stuff.
Look at how good he looks as well, bearing in mind he's got a new baby at home. Sleepless nights
Thank you
seems to
very
be affecting you. Anyway, look, you know the drill, don't you, on this programme? It's not just about us three, it's very much about you guys at home as well. What's on your mind tonight? You can get in touch with us all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com, or you can tweet and X me at GBNews. Now, something that's very much got you guys talking tonight, and I'm running a poll on said Twitter X asking this question because Prince of Wales, William, of course, has issued a statement today. He's calling for an end to the fighting in Gaza as soon as possible. I have to say there's been a huge reaction and response to this. Many people actually saying that he should never have got involved. He should remain politically neutral. So as I said, I've got a poll running on Twitter and X now. I've retweeted it so you can see it on Michelle Dewbs on my thread. Get involved and tell me whether or not you think he should have issued this statement. But I shall I'll say cross. I'm literally sitting next to you. I shall turn to our royal correspondent now, Cameron Walker. First and foremost, how unprecedented is it for a senior royal to issue a statement like this?
It's incredibly rare, and it's incredibly bold of Prince William to do so. I'm getting the sense from a statement he released today, he's trying his hardest to be as neutral as possible. So as you said in your introduction, Michelle, he is calling for the fighting in the Israel-Hamas war to end as soon as possible, but he also is calling for the hostages to be released as well. But it's the timing, I think, that's significant here, because there's fears about an escalation in violence as Israeli forces enter Rafah or attempt to enter Rafah. There's an SNP-led Gaza ceasefire motion tomorrow in the House of Commons, and it all sounds very political, doesn't it? Something which some GB News viewers have really been voicing their concerns over. Some context here. Prince William, of course, is the future king. We live in a constitutional monarchy. He has to be politically neutral. But this afternoon, Michelle, the government's come out and actually supported Prince William for coming out with this statement. A Downing Street spokesperson says his message is consistent with the government's position, and we welcome that intervention. It is important we speak with one voice as a nation. I'm also told that the Foreign Office was fully briefed on that statement.
And many people are saying, but his grandma, of course, the Queen, former Queen, she would never have done something like this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And Prince William became the first senior royal to visit Israel and the occupied West Bank back in 2018. I'm told by his spokesperson that he's really kept abreast of what's been going on ever since then. Prince Charles, then Prince Charles, now king, of course, followed his son in 2020. So there is some precedent for this. But as you say, I think we're really seeing a clear difference here between Queen Elizabeth II and what the future king is doing.
And lastly, many people, because I've really been looking at a lot of responses to this, many people are saying, well, hang on a second, why didn't he release a statement immediately after October the 7th?
Yeah.
But he did issue something, didn't he?
He did. So his spokesperson released an even stronger statement calling for, saying that Israel is exercising its rights to self-defence and calling out the horrors inflicted by Hamas's terrorist attack. And that's what the quotes are. He didn't repeat the Israel exercising its right to self-defence in the statement he released this afternoon. Clearly, it's become a very polarising issue. But he has clearly been following this. I'm also told, though, that this engagement was meant to happen a few weeks ago. But, of course, the Princess of Wales has had abdominal surgery, so all Prince William's engagements have been rescheduled. So that's why it's come now.
Well, I've got to say, Cameron, I'm looking at my inbox now, and there is not a lot of appreciation for his intervention now. I mean, so many people are saying on this, and I told you I've got a poll running, so get involved involved there too, but so many people are saying he should have stayed out with it. It's absolutely disgraceful. Victor said, politics has nothing to do with you. We had such great hopes for you, and you've collapsed all of those hopes in minutes.
Yeah, and I think, well, the government clearly is pleased that Prince William has done so, and I'm getting the sense they're almost using him as a bit of an asset here, like the power of soft diplomacy.
I'm not actually sure whether or not that's a good thing. If the government, if you're supposed to be politically neutral and the government of the day is coming out and virtually high-fiving you to some effect, I'm not really sure that is the position he needs to be in.
And also, what difference is it actually going to make on the ground in Gaza and Israel? And I think we'll have to wait and see what the power of Prince William's words will have in foreign lands.
Yeah, indeed. Well, for now, thank you very much, Cameron Walker. And if you haven't seen that statement in full, I'll try and pop it back up on the screen so you can have another read of it. But basically, he's saying, as we've just been mentioning, that he wants to see an end to the fighting as soon as possible, desperate need for increased humanitarian support in Gaza, critical aid gets in and hostages are released. And he says, even in the darkest hour, we must not succumb to the counsel of despair. He clings to the hope that a brighter future can be found, and he refuses to give up on that. Alex Dean, your thoughts on this?
I think it's a huge mistake, and I deeply regret it. And I think
what,
that
his
the Prince of
statement?
Wales, yes, making the statement, I think he will live to regret it. With due respect to the Prince and indeed to the government, there is a difference between their roles. The government of the day, and indeed the opposition of the day, and we'll hear about what Labour is doing too, are entitled to, nay, bound to take positions on things. But our monarch and our monarch-to-be is different. And with due respect to politicians, politicians are here today, gone tomorrow. If the monarchy is to survive, it needs to maintain its neutrality on such perspectives. It is fortunate for both sides, when I say sides, I mean Westminster and the Palace, that they happen to be in the same position today. But they've set themselves up into a position now where one day they might not be. Well, it may not be about Israel, it may be about another position, maybe about another debate. Once you start taking positions, there is no end to it. People will expect you to take a stance, a moral stance, on everything. And once you start doing that, you will in the end wind up doing something with which the government of the day at Westminster disagrees with you. And that's the height of foolishness, and it's not good for the monarchy.
Tom Buick?
I disagree with that. Prince William, future king, has a constitutional role, not just in our government, but actually overseas realms and territories as well. And I think, actually, when you look at his statement, and you've made that available, which is great, and you read it, it is absolutely proportionate and moderate. And thinking about the motion that's coming before the House of Commons, obviously amended by the Labour opposition, it's clear the way the wind is blowing on this, which is essentially a call to cease what is a humanitarian disaster unfolding in the Gaza Strip, for international community and the Arab states to come together to find not just a short-term solution, but a long-term one. And therefore, I don't feel like the monarch is taking sides. What he's trying to do, I think, is reflect what is probably the majority public mood in this country and the public mood in the countries where he's also the Prince of Wales.
So let me grab the 5% of that I agree with in the spirit of building bridges. Where the wind is blowing, that bit's right. But it's not the job of the monarchy to blow with the wind. It's not the job of the monarchy to seize the currently popular or political line of the day with which everyone in the UK environment happens at the moment to agree. This is going to be our king one day. What are the people in Israel supposed to think? From not our ally, by the way. What are people in Israel supposed to think when he comes to the throne? At a time when, having exhausted all other options, having sought to negotiate, having sought to use surgical strikes, having sought to do all they can to have the hostages returned to them, having been seized under the most brutal acts by Hamas. They, having exhausted those options, wishing now to go and seek to rescue their own civilians, their own hostages, and effectively, given the timing here, the Prince of Wales, our future king, is saying you're wrong.
Tom?
Alex, where I agree with you, and the motion that's before the House of Commons, as amended, says Israel cannot be expected to cease fighting if Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, continues with violence, and that the Israelis have the right to the assurance that the horror of 7th of October cannot happen again. Of course, there's two sides in this conflict. One's a democratic government, Israel. One is a proscribed terrorist organisation. Yeah. The hostages, over 130 of them, do need to be released. But I don't think it's stepping over the line of partisanship or impartiality for our future king to reflect a mood which I think is increasingly there in the public.
But let me put this to you, Tom, because there are an awful lot of conflicts going on in this world. There are an awful lot of children currently being killed, whether it's in civil wars or border wars, whatever. So don't you feel a little bit concerned that Prince William is perhaps, I mean, I'm trying not to be crass with my language, but essentially cherry-picking this conflict, this devastation, this civilian death, are all the other ones occurring in the world right now?
Well, I think that, no, I don't think that, actually. I think he is making a proportionate statement at a time of great humanitarian crisis for the world. And, that's something, of course, it gets from his mother to a large extent. But even on the point about the late Queen, I mean, she did intervene in places like South Africa with the Commonwealth, obviously the Scottish referendum. It is not unprecedented for a monarch to make their feelings known at a time of national crisis.
You know, again, I don't want to trivialise the royals and their role and all the rest of it, but I think back and I thought back to Wembley Stadium. You'll be familiar with the fact that they used to illuminate their arch all the time. So the Ukraine, this conflict, that conflict. Well, as soon as this conflict came along, they then realised that actually this was very complicated. It was creating very strong feelings either side. And then they decided not to illuminate their arch. And I think that taught them quite a strong lesson. Think very carefully before you make statements and positioning and all the rest of it on conflicts, etc., when that's not really your modus operandi. Look, I want to talk politics because we just alluded to it then. There is a situation in the House of Commons, isn't there, tomorrow, where there's going to be a vote potentially on the SNP amendment. It's all about whether or not there should be immediate ceasefire. Well, Labour, of course, it's going to be very interesting what happens there. Some people saying Keir Starmer, perhaps, will face a very strong rebellion. Well, how does he try and head that off? We've just been mentioning a new amendment text has been proposed by Labour. Let's just have a little listen to David Lammy justifying some of these changes.
Keir Starmer and I have been calling for weeks for the fighting to stop, for aid to get in. The situation has evolved, and on the ground it is intolerable, and the Rafah attack cannot go ahead. We are following our Five Eyes partners, Australia, New Zealand and Canada, who a few days ago made it clear that there has to be an immediate humanitarian ceasefire.
Now, I've got to say, Labour have been criticised quite a bit, and this has been a hugely contentious issue for many supporters of the Labour Party. It's really divided the party as to what they're doing. Are they calling for an immediate ceasefire? Are they not? They flip-flopped around on it a fair bit, as you've just been hearing there. They're now emulating the Five Eyes position, essentially saying immediate ceasefire. How do you think this is going to play out tomorrow, perhaps, and also broadly for the Labour Party, Alex?
Well, on one view, it's smart politics from Starmer. This was the first real bump in the road he'd hit for some time. Polls have reflected he's doing well in general perspectives, but he, of course, lost 10 members of his broader team who said they couldn't put up with his less than wholly critical view of Israel hitherto. So in immediate political terms, it will help him within the Labour Party. But you've got to ask, is that the right thing to prioritise? Is your own internal party dialectic the right thing to prioritise? And it's clear, you can hide behind it being a Five Eyes position all you like. This is internal Labour politics. And I mean, I'm not too embarrassed, but you're a Labour man and I'm not, so you'll probably know a bit more about it than I do. But it seems to me this is not being dictated by what's happening on the ground in Gaza. This is what's happening on the ground in British politics and Starmer's desire to keep his party together.
Tom Buick?
Well, I think internal politics always, to some extent, features in these kind of motions. But what's been actually put down when you read the text is not a one-sided motion. It calls, of course, for a ceasefire, for humanitarian aid to be allowed into Rafah and other parts of Gaza where there's absolutely no functioning healthcare service, any kind of services available to the civilian population. But importantly, and this is what I support, it makes it clear that Israel has the right to receive those hostages back, and that we should not allow the current mood to get in the way of the fact that what happened on the 7th of October was an absolute barbarian act by a prescribed terrorist organisation that beheaded babies and raped women at a music festival. So it's right, I think, that there is a motion that is seeking now to unite the whole of the House of Commons. And it'd be interesting, actually, Alex, whether you would support this. Do you think the government should support this motion?
I wouldn't, for at least two reasons. The first is that I disagree with them about calling for a ceasefire, which people only ever think a ceasefire is going to affect one side of a conflict. Hamas won't ever give you a ceasefire. In fact, they've made it very clear they won't rest until Israel doesn't exist any longer. So So the idea of calling for a ceasefire when only one side's hands are bound is ridiculous. You're just going to give, at the most generous interpretation, Hamas a chance to redeploy and rearm. At the worst interpretation, you give them more time to hang on hostages, more time to seek to get resupply from Iran and their friends, and then take the attack back to Israel and visit more horror upon them. Israel is asked to back down and back away when it's defending itself, and it's the only country in the world, when having had this kind of thing done to them, is asked not to defend itself robustly and seek to get its citizens back. So I wouldn't vote with the Labour position for that reason. Not least, by the way, I do also note that they are A, political, and B, elected, neither of which Prince William is, so I at least give Labour credit for that. The second reason I wouldn't is claiming that statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people at the end of this statement. Another position, because they're talking about the two-state solution, another position that Hamas doesn't subscribe to because they don't think Israel should exist. They want to wipe Israel off the map.
But I'm assuming you support the two-state solution.
I do as it happens.
So that's the only long-term peaceful settlement in the region, isn't it?
No, it isn't. There are several things that can happen, not least given that 20% of Israel's population are Arab and have the best quality of life outside of Arabian royalty of anyone in the Middle East. But the reason that I say no is that they are claiming here, that in effect, with the idea of a ceasefire between two parties, that Hamas is a legitimate player, that Hamas is someone with a plain dealer who will abide by a ceasefire. Clue, they won't. And moreover, that they should then be given a state. There's not been an election in Gaza in 17 years. Their effective representative group, Hamas, is placed to do nothing but wipe out Israel. So the idea that you should hand statehood to those people, for me, is for the birds.
Well, you've got 1.5 million people crowded into that tiny area near Rafah. There's a potential offensive being planned by the IDF. What's being called for here is a pause in those hostilities so that humanitarian relief can get across the Egyptian border and via the Mediterranean into that part of Gaza. Why wouldn't you agree that that's something that is needed? I've
explained already. Israel shouldn't be asked to give up when it's succeeding in its objectives and when it's seeking to crush Hamas, which is an objective we should agree with as a prescribed terrorist organisation, and to get its citizens back. And no other country in the world would be asked to take its foot off the accelerator when it's trying to do those things.
Well, do you know what? This is a very emotive topic for many people, isn't it? Very, very strong opinions on all different sides. Also, as well, what do you think this parliamentary debate will actually achieve? Do you think the leaders of Hamas or wherever sitting there paying attention to the outcomes of these debates? Do you think it will influence their next steps? Do you think it will make any difference at all, apart from perhaps domestically, politically, for the future of people here? Anyway, notwithstanding any of that, tell me your thoughts on it all. A reminder that I've got that poll running about Prince William's intervention as well and where you stand on it. After the break, I'll bring you into that conversation, some of your responses, but I also want to talk about farming. Rishi Sunak addressing the National Farmers Union today. He says he's got the backs of British farmers. Has he? You tell me.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Claire, you want to talk by cars growing by a couple of centimetres a year?
Yeah, well, 1 centimetre every 2 years.
Okay.
It's unrelenting because the people are so fixated on the big SUVs. The sales have gone through the roof, and yet it's James Nix, the analyst for Transport and Environment Campaign, said the author of the report on the trend said, spurred on by sales of the largest SUVs, vehicles are getting wider every year. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, it means that our roads
weren't... comfortable ride, beautiful engine. I mean, it's luxury, it's gorgeous.
Well, as I know, I used to have two, but I don't...
You used to have two SUVs?
Well, one SUV at a a time, but I had 2 brands of them. But I'd no longer drive in London now because I just don't see the point, because of the ULEZ, because of the, you know, you can run down a thing and get fined.
Parking spaces, whatever.
The growth in car size also causes issues for their drivers. The report found that largely luxury SUVs, which are about 2 metres wide, no longer fit in off-street parking.
That's true.
They also leave too little space for passengers to get in and out of the vehicles in typical off-street spaces, and they're about 2.4 metres wide, the report found. And I'll tell you, I was stuck in a bus last night trying to get home, and the buses couldn't move because the streets were too crammed with all of these massive cars either side.
Chelsea tractors.
And it was gridlocked.
Yeah, but maybe they're not the problem. Maybe the buses are the problem.
The buses take people to their place of work and get
I'd
them
like
home.
to know when, because when I go through London, all I see is empty buses.
Oh, you're lucky. Every time I'm on one, they're full.
Well, they're obviously only full at rush hour. You see, the thing is, property developers, when they do high-rise car parks, or they build a multiplex cinema and there's a car park attached to it, that's not my fault that I can't fit into their space. It's their fault. So
well, it's all driven by money, isn't it? The more spaces that they have, the more people they can get.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello there, Michelle Dewberry till 7 o'clock. Alongside me, Alex Dean and Tom Buick remain. That poll that's running about Prince William's intervention on the Israel-Gaza, currently 84% of you are saying that Prince William was wrong to issue that statement, that he should remain politically neutral. But John says we live in a democracy and we have so-called free speech, Michelle. Surely that should extend to the Prince and beyond. Andy says, how could anyone at all be criticised for wanting an end to the fighting in Gaza? Elizabeth says, I've no problem with the Prince of Wales making this statement. I'm happy to hear his views on this and other subjects. Would you be happy to hear his views if it was completely at odds with your own? Would that perhaps, though, if he was to be king, or when he is to be king, would that distance your support for the monarchy? Elizabeth, get in touch and tell me your thoughts on all of that. But anyway, let's talk farming, shall we? Because according to Rishi Sunak today, he has their back. He is speaking to the farmers. He's the first PM, actually, to speak to the National Farmers Union in about 15 years, after Gordon Brown was the last one. Anyway, let's have a little listen to some of the things that he had to say.
Walked the fields up and down in Swaledale and Wensleydale. Enjoyed our high-quality British meat, which, let me tell you, we will continue to support people to eat. I visited upland farms, hill farms, arable and livestock farms. I even tried my hand at milking once. Not very successfully, I must say.
There's certain images I do not want in my mind. Rishi Sunak grappling with a set of teats is among them. Anyway, I know, sorry about
Thanks,
that.
Michelle.
Anyway, so he was basically saying to these farmers that he understands their concerns. Let's be clear, Alex, we've seen protests from farmers up and down the land now on a variety of different things, whether it's bureaucracy, green regulations, cheap grain from Ukraine, etc. What did you make to him? Firstly, even been there, what was he doing there?
Oh, I think it's right that our Prime Minister speaks to all different sectors, so I think it was good that he was there. I think there are three issues here. The first is universal and the two are specific to the UK. The universal one is that big conglomerates, supermarket buyers and the B2B pieces that procure from farmers have forced prices down. That's not just true in the UK, that's true across the whole world. So that's a pressure that farmers are under. We can recognise that, but it is a universal issue. The two specific to the UK, and two things can be true at once. The first is that it was always going to be the case that as we do deals with friendly countries, the first ups that were always likely, Australia, Canada and so forth, Britain can gain immensely from those deals, but our farmers are going to be challenged by competition with farmers in those markets with much bigger farms and so forth. Now, in the immediate term, those people can be assisted in the UK, but in the longer term, they're going to have to learn to live with that competition, not least, I think, with assistance from British people agreeing to buy British more, which is something hitherto we've not really succeeded in doing. But the last thing that is also true at the same time is that the European is an agricultural protectionist racket. And our friends across the Channel don't have those same rules on free trade. When I said that we're going to have to learn to compete with Australian and Canadian farmers, what I meant was, as long as they are not receiving state aid, which more or less and broadly speaking they don't, it's a different story in the European Union. And if our farmers are being squeezed by the loss of European subsidies, at least to help them on a glide path to competition, we're going to need to support them.
Before I bring Tom in, I just want to go back to that first point. When I asked you what he was doing there, you said, oh, well, it's great to basically talk to all different people. But this is the first time a Prime Minister has addressed this conference for about 15 years. As I said, I think the last time was 2008, Gordon Brown. He was there, let's be absolutely clear, Alex, because there was a recent poll that showed that within rural communities, farming communities, etc., the Tories are going to get a kicking.
Well, you can't really win, can you? Because if on the one hand you don't go, people say you continue to ignore the community. And on the other hand, if you do go, people say you're only responding to the fact that polling said this. So
well, you
what's he supposed to do?
Tom, where are you on it?
Well, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of, this government realising the political ramifications of the falling out with the countryside. Although, that said, Labour only represents something like 1% of rural seats at the moment. They've got a plan, they say, to respect the countryside more, whatever that means. But I think it would mean, for example, signing up to the EU veterinary agreement, which would essentially align a lot of regulations with the common agricultural policy in the European Union. I certainly wouldn't support that. And what actually I found quite puzzling about the Prime Minister turning up essentially at a producer conference today, he said he's got the back of farmers and producers, but what about consumers? Surely we've got a cost of living crisis. You mentioned that, yes, prices have been drawn down, but for people who are struggling for the weekly shop, Alex, that's a good thing.
So not only is that true, but as a percentage of people's average expenditure, the weekly shop has dropped and dropped and dropped in Britain. In the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, what you spent on food for your house was a much larger percentage of people's disposable income than it is today. But there is a contrariwise point on that. And Liz Truss, much mocked for talking about
about cheese.
About cheese and apples and so forth. There was a point there about having our own produce and being food sufficient. And it's not just the green point about food miles, it's also the broader point about being self-sufficient as a nation when troubles come and you don't have to buy from other people.
I thought there was a good point that Minette Batters, the outgoing president of the NFU, made today, where she talked about government does have a role to procure, for example, quality school meals by sourcing quality produce from our farms, the same for our hospitals. So there are ways in which farming can be assisted. It doesn't have to be seen as anti-competitive. But I do think it's interesting that the Prime Minister goes along today and essentially sides with the producers and not with the people who have to make ends meet with the weekly shop.
The divide between the groups you're talking about once wouldn't have been seen as stark as it is today, because, of course, in the past, much larger percentage of the British population worked in rural areas, lived in rural areas. The depopulation of those places and the industrialisation of agriculture is what we're seeing here. I don't think you should criticise the Prime Minister for going. I think we might be criticising predecessors for not going.
Also, as well, I think there's a few points to this, because as part of this speech, Rishi Sunak was basically saying to this audience, I know that you farm because you love what you do. And one of the leaders of the conference basically afterwards responded and said, well, actually, let's be clear. Yes, people might love what they do, but ultimately farming is a business. It needs to turn a profit. And yes, of course, Tom, consumers want lower prices at the checkouts, but ultimately we also want produce on the shelves. And you're going to get to the point with farming where actually if we don't give these guys good deals, they're just going to have to leave that industry. And it's interesting in Wales as well, because whilst the Tories are getting a kicking over here, in rural communities and all the rest of it, in Wales, farmers are not having a good time there. They're out protesting as well against some of the Welsh strategies, how they're dealing and compensating farmers. So Labour haven't got it right there.
No, what I'm saying, there's a trade-off here between outright protectionism, which I think is something that most consumers don't want to see, and absolutely supporting our farmers, who don't live the life of Riley. They're not multi-millionaires, not many of them anyway, unless they're part of huge agri-firm production. So absolutely we need to support them. But I'll just say this, Michelle, farming income has doubled since the 2016 referendum. It's now at £8 billion a year. And we subsidise farming by about £3 billion a year. I mean, it's a very heavily subsidised part of industry. I would support that. But I think, we've got to look at the balance between protectionism, supporting the producer interest and ensuring that people get a good deal at the supermarket shelves as well, which is about also asking questions of the supermarkets when they're negotiating these prices with farms.
Well, that part I agree with, but, you know, I'm really wary of romanticising these things either side. On the one hand, you know, for a generation, the average age of farmers has crept up and up. People aren't going into it. People, not just because they love it, it's because they were born into it and have got a farm, and that's what they feel they have to do, is why people are farming. Rates of depression and even suicide amongst our farming community has been alarmingly high. But, so I'm not romanticise it there, but from the other perspective, Michelle, it's also true that amongst our farmers, their income's gone up since Brexit. So that doesn't get reflected in the debate either.
Are you a farmer? What do you make to it all? One of my viewers here says, Michelle, I think you've just misspoke. You said Sunak said he's got the farmers' backs. I think what you meant to say was Sunak's got the farmers' backs up. I hear you. I'll bring you into this conversation after the break. I also want to talk to you about courts. We've got such a backlog in this country now. Is it time that courts sit 24/7 until they clear these backlogs? Why just restrict that strategy to courts? Tell me your thoughts.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Alex Dean and Tom Hewitt remain alongside me. Neil says, Michelle, please, can you tell Prince William just to cut the ribbons and shut up? Not appreciating that statement there, I can tell you. I want to talk to you about courts. Have you ever been a victim of crime? What was your justice process like? How quick was it? Because some cases are apparently waiting up to 5 years for their cases to go to court. I mean, that's pretty disgraceful, really, on so many different avenues, whether it's the person that's been held on remand, who, by the way, could be innocent, whether it's the victim trying to get justice. Apparently, we've got a backlog of more than 66,000 outstanding cases. There was a suggestion this week, and you are a barrister, so I
haven't practiced for a long time, but yeah.
You see, in my eyes, you'll always be a barrister.
That's very sweet.
There was a suggestion made this week that courts should essentially do what they did after the riots, I think it was in 2011, and run 24/7 in order to get through this backlog. What do you think?
There's a reason I think you can't do that. And I say that knowing that Alex Chalk, with whom I was in chambers and is now our Justice Secretary, I wasn't a very good barrister. Alex Chalk really was a very good barrister and knows what he's doing here. We'll be thinking about these things. When those courts sat in the aftermath of riots and were doing quick hearings with people, all the cases were very similar. People were charged with similar offences. The matters could be dealt with quite quickly. And you were dealing basically on an emergency footing. What you're talking about, it wouldn't be a month, it wouldn't be a couple of weeks. You're talking about putting our courts on an emergency full-time sitting for years. Now, I get the kind of, we are taking action kind of, but a large part of that time would be spent sort of sitting around for the virtue of sitting for it, because you're not going to get the witness to come to court at 3 a.m. To give their evidence. You're not going to, unless we're going to really pay eye-watering rates, you're not going to get the expert forensic scientist and the doctor to come give their evidence at 4:45, or to sit as a floating witness between 3 and 8 a.m. But
there'll be simpler cases, though, that don't have all of those component parts. Surely you could just look at your backlog and go, right, there's your complex cases, off you go, stay there. You can be dealt with during work days.
So the funny thing is that quite often the case you think is going to be complicated isn't, and the case you think that is complicated is. And one of the things that often happens is that somebody gets to the door of court, finds that their prosecution has their witnesses lined up, and then pleads guilty. Now, that's one thing, and it's very frustrating to happen, and they get a smaller discount on their guilty plea as a result. It's one thing for that to happen at court on a Friday at 4. It's quite another thing for it to happen at 3 a.m. And then find that you've got to send everyone home again, and you've got an empty courtroom for which you've paid tens of thousands of pounds that's going to sit empty overnight.
So it's a no from you?
It's a no.
It's a no.
I don't have Alex's legal background. My professional background is in education, but I just think, talking as a citizen, I mean, it's just not acceptable, is it, surely, that victims of crime are waiting 5 years? And I'm afraid this is a story now that's repeated across the public sector. We've got record NHS waiting lists. We've got people who need treatment urgently, waiting years in some cases. I just take the view at the end of the day, you know, as electors in a democracy where the rule of law is absolutely paramount and therefore justice for victims, we need to find a way of resourcing these cases. There are, I'm told, 20 Nightingale courts still in operation. I do take the point, though, Alex is making about, would a family social worker turn up at 3 o'clock in the morning over a family case?
Not just once, again and again.
Unlikely, but, you know, as with the NHS, I think we need to start talking about public services in this country, A, reforming them, but B, running some of them 7 days a week. That's the society we live in now. 7 days a week.
That's a different point, and I'm absolutely up for compromise here. I think there's a lot of compromise to happen. You can make up more judges and sit at weekends. You can extend court sitting hours. You can take the interlocutory hearings, which take up a lot of... So the hearings that are held before the actual trial, which take up a lot of the time, and you can ram those into a Saturday, Sunday hearing where none of the public need to... nobody's going to turn up to watch an interlocutory hearing, which is about the process of getting something to court. Right, you can do that, but the idea of, for machismo's sake, saying we're going to sit overnight 24/7 until it gets done, that's the difference. You can be pragmatic and flexible without going to this kind of
There's Lord Hogan Howe, the former Commissioner of the Met Police. He was the person that was making these suggestions, and I think in his sights he particularly had people like, you know, your protesters that spend their time gluing themselves to the floor or restricting your ability to move around and all the rest of it.
Sorry, I don't mean to dominate time, but from time to time we have specialist courts that sit and do nothing but. Right, you have, during the miners' strike, there were courts that sat and just did miners' strike cases, and they weren't actually, you know, they weren't vindictive to the miners all the time either. Some were very sympathetic. You have riots and so forth. You have big protests, but the idea it should become the new norm, that's wrong.
You know, we do need radical thinking in this country, though, don't we? We're in a mess in pretty much all areas, all aspects now. No one can get in to see whether it's doctors, dentists, whatever. So actually, radical thinking, radical working is perhaps what is needed. But can you imagine, I don't know, some of the unions, if you tried to say to the unions, right, your workers have now got to start, half the time, you struggle to get people to work on a Sunday. Can you imagine if you started saying 24/7? I can just hear the unions now. Goodness gracious me, what do you make to all of that? Also, our Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. He just left the Falkland Islands, the first Foreign Secretary to visit there in about 30 years. Was that a much-needed visit or not? Tell me and I'll see you in 2. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place, and to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So, what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, it's things like, in the past, I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, what on earth's going on. But I've had 2 run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjum Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that.
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry till 7. PR consultant Alex Dean alongside me and visiting professor at Staffordshire University, Tom Bewitt. Linda, I've just read out your Twitter message to Alex about him being better looking in the flesh when you saw him earlier on. You said I wouldn't read it to him, but I did, and he appreciated it. Stephen on Twitter says, Michelle, courts could always start sitting early at 6 a.m. and carry on going until at least 8 o'clock at night. Why do we always give those potential criminals, a lie-in the morning? But Alex has just been explaining to me that you can already start courts a lot earlier. I'm not sure as early as 6 a.m.
No, I mean, the courts are working earlier than they actually sit so that you can get things sorted out for trial. You don't know, for example, if your defendant's going to be produced from prison.
Well, there you go. Michael says, you sound like you've got quite a bit of experience of this, Michael. I've got to say, you're talking about the start times, the finishing times, but what about the lunch breaks? You say they have at least about a 2-hour lunch break per day. We could sort that out. There you go. How does a 5-year wait work if the offender is on remand? Well, that offender sits on remand until his time has come to face the court, and this is one of the problems, Paul. So there you go. Anyway, look, Lord David Cameron has become the first Foreign Secretary to visit the Falkland Islands in 30 years. This is all about basically Argentina basically saying they want to return these islands to Argentina. Let's have a listen.
As long as the Falkland Islands want to be part of the UK family, they are absolutely welcome to be part of that family, and we will support them and back them and help protect and defend them absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, for as long as they want. And I hope that's for a very, very long time, possibly forever.
16, your thoughts?
Don't regard it as controversial in any way for the Foreign Secretary to visit part of, as he puts it, the British family. It's only controversial because the Argentines absurdly claim, contrary to settled law, that they have anything to do with the Falkland Islands. And if they stopped with that absurd claim, then it would no longer be controversial, would it?
Do you think they'll stop with their absurd claims? Well, in fact, do you think they're absurd? I'm assuming you agree.
Well, there's a lot of bellicose rhetoric that's been coming out of Buenos Aires since that centre-right, perhaps he calls himself a libertarian, president was elected in Argentina. I think the real issue, and I hope I'm not privy, obviously, to the discussions that will be taking place down there in Government House and with the residents of the Falkland Islands. I think the real question here for our Foreign Secretary is why has the patrols, the Royal Navy patrols around the islands been reduced since 2017? You know, there's just one gunboat, apparently, available to our armed forces there with 4 Typhoon fighters, and, of course, a garrison is still there in the Falklands. Now, meanwhile, 26 F-16s are about to be sold with US congressional support from Denmark to Argentina. What's all that about? So it seems to me there is a case for our posture, our defence posture in the Falklands Islands being increased, and I hope that that's actually what the Foreign Secretary is there to do, as opposed just to a long-distance Foreign Office junket at taxpayers' expense.
Well, the Argentines will find out, I think, were they to explore that, what the British response would be. But it's rather telling, isn't it, that you're rightly, I think, talking about defence provision. Well, you only need that if someone's going to break international law, take the law into their own hands, commit an act of aggression in the first place. You don't need to think about how you're going to defend the Falklands if the Argentines are going to behave peaceably and reasonably, do you?
Yeah, but Alex, I mean, just to broaden the point out slightly, I mean, this government has presided over an absolute disaster when it comes to our armed forces and the reduction in armed forces personnel. And take the Royal Navy, for example, 11 frigates are being decommissioned. These are ships that we have because of a staffing crisis in the Royal Navy that this government has not been able to plug.
It's a shame we get to a party political point, because I don't agree with that. I think provision in the Royal Navy, certainly ship provision, has been led in large degree by what admirals tell us and tell the politicians they need. And the leadership in the Navy have got what they want, and quite often it's led to fewer frigates and fewer destroyers than we, public, might think is necessary. Now, we may be right, we may be wrong, but they followed the advice of the experts in procuring what we need from shipping. On personnel and manpower, I think it's wrong again to make it partisan political issue. Governments of all stripes have betrayed our military in the last 2 generations. Our military should be not just a little bit larger, it should be a lot larger. That said, Britain can be proud of the fact that we're one of the few countries that's met our 2% NATO expenditure, not just this last year and last 2 years since Russia's outrageous invasion of Ukraine, but for generations.
Yeah, but mothballing 11 frigates is just a failure, isn't it, of planning?
Well, I wouldn't do it myself, but I think we face a changed environment, and of course our Navy plans in multi-year cycles. Perhaps we need to be more flexible in the way we think about that.
Well, there you go, Mark, as well, echoing your point, saying, yeah, fine, all well and good, Cameron saying he's going to protect the Falklands, but what on earth will he protect them with? Jerry says it was absolutely right that he went to the Falklands, but it should have been a one-way ticket. You're a harsh man, Jerry. And Derek says, I reckon he was there conjuring up a deal to send asylum seekers to the Falkland Islands. That says Derek. Oh, Derek, I can see where you're going with that. I think people will be up in arms about that suggestion if it was ever going to be true. I'm not sure it would be, but anyway, for now, look, Tom, I've appreciated your company tonight. Alex, I've appreciated yours too. I asked you on Twitter and X whether or not Prince William was right or wrong to have made that statement on Israel, Gaza. Get this, 15% of you said yes, he should have made that statement. 85% of you said he should have remained neutral. Well, there you go. Look, that's all that I've got time for tonight. Have a fantastic night. Don't go anywhere, though. Nigel Farage up next, and I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. I'm Alex Burkill and here's your latest GB News weather forecast. It is going to be widely very wet for most of us tomorrow morning. However, before then, we still have some rain around this evening and overnight, particularly across parts of the south as a front has made its way southwards as we've gone through today and is going to linger across southern parts through the night, bringing cloudy, wet weather here. Clearer skies further north at least to start the night before some cloudy, wet and windy conditions feed up from the southwest. Like I said, some clear skies to start the night in the north, and so we could see a touch of frost for a time before the unsettled weather pushes its way in, lifting our temperatures. So most places will start tomorrow mild but wet. Watch out for some heavy rain, could cause some spray on the roads, and we're likely to see a bit of flooding and some travel disruption, especially in parts of the southwest. However, the rain will clear away towards the east as we go through the day, with something drier and brighter following in behind. Just a few showers to watch out for here and there. It is going to be windy though, and so that wind will take the edge off the temperatures, which are above average for the time of year. More unsettled weather to come through the end of the week, likely to see another band of rain sweeping its way through on Thursday, and that could be quite heavy, some downpours possible with showers likely elsewhere, and more showers to come as we go through Friday. It's likely to be a bit blustery at times too, but there should be some sunshine in between into Saturday, and it looks a little bit drier, but temperatures dropping closer to average for the time of year.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great